Alex sat at the dining table, nervously drumming his fingers on the wood. He was 27, but at that moment, he felt like a teenager about to drop a bombshell on his parents. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the old wall clock. "Mom? Dad," he started, clearing his throat. "I need to tell you something important. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm getting married." Mary, his mother, froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth, as if his words had paralyzed her. Slowly, she set it down on the edge of her plate and locked eyes with him. "Married?" she echoed, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "And to whom, may I ask?" "Emily," Alex said firmly. A tense silence followed. His father, George, calmly took a sip of his coffee while Mary clenched her napkin with a tight grip. "You mean Emily? That little girl who used to follow you around everywhere?" Her voice carried a sharp edge. Alex sighed. He knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy, but he had still hoped for some support. "Yes, Mom. We've known each other since childhood. She's always been there for me. I love her." Mary folded her arms across her chest. "Love her?" she repeated, shaking her head. "Alex, you can do better. You're educated, smart, successful. You could find a girl from a good family, someone with a real future." "Mary," George interjected calmly, "you married a guy with no money once. Or have you forgotten how we started?" She turned to her husband, disbelief flashing across her face. "That was different, George. That was a different time. We built everything together. But she was there for me when I was sick. When I didn't know if I'd make it, she never left my side, even when others did. Isn't that more important than money or status?" Alex's voice was steady as he met his mother's gaze. Mary took a slow, deep breath, pressing her lips into a thin line. He could see the storm raging inside her, but she kept it contained. "Do what you want," she finally said, standing up from the table. "But don't expect my blessing." She walked away, leaving behind a silence colder than before. Alex rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the moment. George placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Give her time, son. She'll come around," he said. Alex nodded, but deep down he knew his mother wouldn't give up that easily. Alex was 15 when it all started. At first, it seemed like just a bad cold, fatigue, a mild fever, headaches, but weeks passed and the symptoms wouldn't go away. He fell asleep in class, lost his appetite, and some days he couldn't even get out of bed. Doctors had no answers. "It's just teenage exhaustion," some said. "Could be a rare virus," others guessed. "We need more tests," they all eventually concluded. Mary was relentless. She dragged him to specialists, spent hours reading medical journals, comparing symptoms, searching for answers. Every new doctor brought hope, but in the end, they always shrugged. Alex kept getting weaker. His skin turned pale, his eyes lost their spark. He had to quit sports, then struggled with schoolwork, and within months, even climbing stairs left him breathless. George worked overtime to pay for endless tests, but money drained like water through a sieve. When their savings ran dry, they sold their second car. Then came the canceled family vacations. When that wasn't enough, Mary sold her jewelry. "They're just things," she said, looking at her now empty jewelry box. "What matters is getting Alex well." But he didn't get better. One evening, after weeks of barely leaving his bed, Emily showed up. Her chestnut hair was braided, and in her hands she held a glass jar filled with homemade lemonade. "You look like a zombie," she said, placing the jar on his nightstand. "Drink up." Alex gave her a weak smile. "Thanks, but I'm not really in the mood." Emily crossed her arms. "You're never in the mood for anything. But you're drinking it, or I swear, tomorrow I'll bring some awful green herbal tea instead." He sighed and took a small sip. It was tart, with just a hint of bitterness. "See? Already better," she grinned. "Now tell me, what's your plan for getting better?" Alex let out a dry laugh. "If only I knew." She didn't look away. "You're going to fight, you're going to get through this, because you're strong." They were just words, but somehow they stuck with him. Maybe, just maybe, he could make it. Maybe one day he'd be back on the soccer field, going to parties, feeling alive again. Weeks later, the first glimmer of hope appeared. A new doctor, recommended by a family friend, suggested an alternative approach to treatment. It wasn't a miracle cure, but little by little, Alex started improving. He stopped sleeping all day. His body slowly regained strength. He was still far from being a healthy teenager, but for the first time in a long while, there was a spark in his eyes. And through it all, Emily was there. She brought him books, made him laugh, refused to let him slip into despair. Back then, he didn't realize how much she meant to him. But now, he did. A wedding day is supposed to be the happiest moment in a couple's life. But from the moment Alex woke up, the tension in the air was undeniable. Standing in front of the mirror in his hotel room, he adjusted his tie, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. It wasn't fear of getting married. He had never been more sure of anything. He loved Emily with all his heart. But his mother? Mary had made it painfully clear that she didn't think Emily was good enough for him. And while she hadn't tried to stop the wedding outright, her cold disapproval hung over the day like a dark cloud. "Alex, are you sure about this?" a voice behind him asked. He turned to see his father, George, standing in the doorway with a knowing smile. "Of course," Alex replied, looking back at his reflection. I just wish Mom could support me for once." George placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "She'll come around. Maybe not right away, but in time. The only thing that matters is that you know what you want." Alex nodded, though the doubt gnawed at him. He knew his mother well. She never let things go, especially when she believed she was right. The ceremony took place in a small chapel on the outskirts of town. Nestled among towering oak trees, it was quiet, intimate, perfect for them. Emily looked stunning in her simple yet elegant dress, her eyes shining as she walked down the aisle. For a moment, Alex forgot about everything else as he took her hands in his. But then his eyes met his mother's. A cold shiver ran through him. She sat stiffly in her seat, lips pressed into a thin line, her disapproval radiating like ice. Meanwhile, George gave Alex an encouraging nod and even shot him a quick wink. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the reception dinner. After the official toasts, when the tension had slightly eased, Emily's mother, Sarah, stood up with an unexpected announcement. She held a small envelope in her hands. "Alex, Emily," she began warmly, looking at her daughter with love. "I know you've been searching for a place to call home, so I wanted to help you with that." She handed the envelope to Emily, who hesitated before opening it. Alex leaned in to see what was inside. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the deed to a house, the same house they had fallen in love with months ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy, tucked away in the woods, with a big front porch, perfect for watching the sunset. "Mom?" Emily's voice broke with emotion. "Is this real?" "Yes," Sarah smiled. "It's yours now." A murmur of surprise spread through the room, followed by applause and congratulations. But then, one voice cut through the joy like a blade. "A house? In the middle of nowhere?" Mary scoffed, shaking her head. "That's not a gift. That's a punishment." The room fell silent. Alex felt his face heat up. "Mom, enough," he said quietly but firmly. "No, it's not enough," she snapped. "You're really planning to live in some rundown shack? You could have a proper home in the city, around people, and instead you're settling for this?" Alex clenched his fists, but before he could say anything, Sarah spoke up. Her voice was calm but unwavering. "Mary, I understand that you have your own opinions, but this was meant as a gift, as a way to help them start their life together. If you don't like it, that's your choice. But please, don't ruin this moment for them." Mary let out a short breath, clearly biting back her response. But her expression said it all. She wasn't backing down. Alex exhaled slowly and looked at Emily. There was sadness in her eyes, but when she met his gaze, she gave him a small, reassuring smile. In that moment, it hit him. His mother's approval didn't matter. What mattered was Emily. He had chosen her, and he had no regrets. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, turning to his mother-in-law. "This means more to us than you know." Sarah nodded, and Emily squeezed his hand. The celebration continued, but the tension lingered in the air. Alex knew this was just the beginning of a long road. But as he looked at Emily, he knew one thing for sure. With her by his side, he could face anything. Alex turned off the ignition, and the truck rumbled into silence. The only sounds left were the rustling trees and the distant chirping of crickets. Golden rays of the setting sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting the house in a warm, amber glow. Their house. It stood there, surrounded by overgrown bushes and tall grass. The paint on the exterior was peeling, and the porch sagged slightly, but there was something about it, something that felt like home. "Well, we're here," Emily murmured, squeezing his hand. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Alex nodded, trying to feel that same excitement. Right now, all he could see was the work ahead. A lot of work. "Think we can handle this?" he asked, stepping out of the truck and taking it all in. "Of course," she grinned, following him. "We've got each other, that's all we need." Hand in hand, they took their first step into their new life. From day one, fixing up the house turned out to be way more challenging than expected. Alex had never been afraid of hard work, but between pulling weeds, clearing out debris, and fixing pipes that decided to start leaking on day one, he was exhausted. But there were good moments too. Working together, the house slowly started to feel alive. Evenings were spent on the porch, soaking in the scent of fresh-cut grass and the hum of cicadas. Alex found himself breathing easier, not just physically but mentally. Gone was the stress of the city, the tension of always trying to meet expectations. Here, they were free. One of the most surprising things was his appetite. For years, food had felt like a chore. His illness had made sure of that. But here, after a long day of work, he actually looked forward to meals. "Want some more?" Emily asked one evening, raising an eyebrow at his empty plate. He nodded, just as surprised as she was. "Yeah, I think I do." "That was amazing." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "Guess country air is doing you some good." Alex thought about that. Maybe it really was. Maybe this quiet life, away from the chaos, was exactly what he needed. He felt stronger than he had in years, and that alone gave him hope. A few weeks later, just as they were finally settling in, Alex got an unexpected call from his dad. "Hey son, how's it going?" George's voice was warm but cautious. "Not bad," Alex said, stepping onto the porch. "The house is coming together. We're getting used to it. Actually, we like it." "Glad to hear it." A pause, then, "Your mom and I want to come visit. See how you two are doing." Alex stiffened. He knew this wasn't his mother's idea. George must have talked her into it. "When were you thinking?" he asked carefully. "Next week. That okay with you?" Alex ran a hand down his face. He had known this moment would come. "Yeah," he said finally. "Come by." Later, when he told Emily, she sighed but nodded. "Well, it had to happen eventually." "Think she'll change her mind when she sees how happy you are?" He shrugged. "I don't know. But one thing's for sure. I'm not the person she tried to control anymore. And if she doesn't like that, that's her problem, not mine." Emily smiled, wrapping her arms around him. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." Holding her close, Alex knew one thing for certain. No matter what, this was home. The road to Alex and Emily's house turned out to be far more challenging than Mary had expected. The narrow country roads winding through the hills shook her so much that she asked George to slow down several times. "This is just ridiculous," she muttered, gripping the door handle. "How do they even live out here? In the middle of nowhere, with no proper stores, no civilization." George smirked but kept his eyes on the road. "I think Alex found exactly what he needed here." Mary scoffed. "This is just a phase. He's not cut out for this kind of life." George simply shook his head, unwilling to argue. They were almost there. Alex spotted his parents' car from a distance. He stood on the porch, wiping his hands on a towel as the dusty old Toyota turned onto the driveway. "They're here," he said, glancing at Emily. She nodded, but tension was clear on her face. They both knew this wasn't going to be an easy reunion. As George parked the car, Alex stepped forward. At that moment, Mary froze as if she had just seen a ghost. "Alex." Her voice trembled. The man standing before her wasn't the frail, sickly young man she remembered. He had changed. There was confidence in his posture, his face looked healthier, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. "Hey, Mom," he said calmly, then turned to his father. "Dad." George smiled and shook his son's hand firmly. "You look great, son." Alex nodded, but his focus remained on his mother. She seemed unsure how to react. Emily stepped forward and offered her hand to Mary, but Mary only gave a curt nod. "Come on in." "No need to stand out here," Alex said, motioning toward the house. Dinner helped ease the tension a little, but the atmosphere remained strained. Alex noticed that Mary barely touched her food. Instead, she watched him closely, waiting for the right moment to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Alex, tell me honestly, are you truly happy here?" she finally asked, setting her fork down. He met her gaze and nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Mom, I am." "But how?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. There's nothing here, no real job, no future. Mom, Alex interrupted gently, for the first time in years, I feel alive. I'm not just existing, I'm living. George nodded in understanding, but Mary still struggled to accept that her son had chosen this life. Emily. Mary suddenly turned to her daughter-in-law. Did you convince him to move here? Emily sat up a little straighter, but her voice remained calm. I didn't push him into anything. This was his decision. I just supported him. Mary shook her head but didn't argue. In that moment, she realized she no longer had control over her son. He had made his choice, and it had nothing to do with her. That night, George and Mary stayed in the guest room. By morning, Mary still seemed deep in thought. Just before they left, she lingered on the porch, looking back at the house. Alex stood beside her, silently waiting. I don't understand you, she finally said. But if you're really happy, I'll try to accept it. Something inside Alex loosened. Thank you, Mom. She didn't reply, but for the first time in a long while she looked at him with warmth. As their car disappeared around the bend, Alex took Emily's hand. Do you think this is the start of something new? She asked softly. He nodded. Yeah, I think it is. Months passed since his parents' visit. Autumn had fully settled in, wrapping the farm in warm golden hues. Alex and Emily sat on the porch, enjoying hot tea with apple pie she had baked that morning. The air carried the scent of cinnamon and fresh pastry, filling their home with comfort. Emily squeezed his hand, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was dipping behind the trees. There was something in her eyes, something unspoken, but she remained silent. Alex could tell she had something important to say, but he didn't rush her. Alex, she finally spoke. I need to tell you something. He turned to her, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Is everything okay? She smiled, but her eyes glistened with emotion. I'm pregnant. The world seemed to pause. Alex stared at her, processing her words, then suddenly burst into laughter. Not out of amusement, but pure, overwhelming joy. He swept Emily into his arms, spinning her around as if nothing else in the world mattered. Are you serious? He asked, searching her eyes. She nodded. I found out a few days ago, but wanted to be sure before telling you. Alex ran a hand through her hair, then gently kissed her forehead. This is the best thing that could ever happen to us, he whispered. When they shared the news with George and Mary, the reactions were exactly as expected. George was thrilled, congratulating them both with genuine excitement. But Mary sat in silence for a long time before finally speaking. A baby, she said quietly. So that means you're really staying here? Yes, Mom, Alex said gently. This is our home. This is where our family belongs. She nodded, lost in thought. Then, unexpectedly, she said, then I need to come visit, help you get everything ready for the baby. Alex and Emily exchanged surprised glances. This was the first time Mary had genuinely offered to be involved. Are you sure? Emily asked carefully. Of course I am, Mary said firmly. I can't just stand by while my grandchild grows up like this. A few months later, Mary actually came. And something about her had changed. She helped Emily with shopping, picked out furniture for the nursery, even tried her hand at cooking some of Emily's recipes, though not always successfully. But most importantly, she was trying. George visited often too, helping Alex with the farm. Their conversations were no longer stiff and distant, but warm and real. For the first time in years, Alex felt truly at peace. When the day finally came for Emily to go to the hospital, the whole family was there. The delivery was difficult, but when Alex held his daughter for the first time, his heart swelled with love. She's beautiful, he whispered, staring at her tiny face. Emily, exhausted but smiling, nodded. She looks just like you. As Alex gazed at his daughter, he knew that his life had changed forever. Everything he had been through, all the struggles, all the uncertainty, had led him to this moment. He wasn't just holding a baby, he was holding the future. A few days later, when they returned home, Mary held her granddaughter for the first time. She stared at the tiny face for a long time before whispering, "You've given our family a second chance." Alex looked at his mother and realized that they all had. A new chapter had begun, and this time, he was ready for it.